Well, hi, everyone. I just want to start out with an administrative announcement. We'd like to ask you to stay muted, but please feel free to use the chat box to add your questions. And our board member, Don Lococo, will collect the questions for the Q&A portion of the program at the end. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Poe Murray. I live in Sandy Hook, and I have been leading the Newtown Action Alliance since 2012 when my neighbor killed 26 children and educators in 2012. June is National Gun Violence Awareness Month, and we felt it was really important to engage in a discussion on a topic that centers around gun violence victims and survivors and their families. So thank you for taking the time tonight to join our important conversation on the federal efforts to provide resources for the gun violence prevention victims. Our hearts are with you during this very difficult time in our nation. We grieve and we stand with you to demand justice for George Floyd and others who have been senselessly murdered by individuals with or without guns and in and out of police uniforms. We are honored tonight that Senator Bob Casey, Representatives Dwight Evans and Debbie Murcasel-Powell, and Sandy and Lonnie Phillips from Survivors Empowered have joined us to lead our conversation. It's tragic that 40,000 Americans are killed by guns and thousands more are shot and injured every single year. We wish we knew the exact number of individuals who survive a gunshot wound. Regrettably, CDC's non-fatal firearm injuries estimate is unreliable because the injury information is collected from a sample of hospitals that is designed to act as a cross-section of all the nation's hospitals, large and small, urban and rural. The number could be as low as 50,000 and as high as 190,000. Regardless, there are too many Americans who are injured by guns, and these surviving victims lack resources after shooting incidents. We know that gun violence prevention laws will save many lives, and we are grateful for gun safety champions in the House of Representatives and the Senate who are introducing life-saving policies. We need more than legislation on gun reform, however. We need legislation to support individuals, families, and communities that are directly impacted by gun violence. From Newtown to Parkland, from Hartford to Chicago, from Milwaukee to Oakland, there are too many families who live with trauma from gun violence that lingers, and the Phillips family, Sandy and Lonnie, are one of those families. In 2012, Sandy and Lonnie lost their daughter, Jessie, in a mass shooting incident in the Aurora movie theater. Jessie did not survive the shooting, but Sandy and Lonnie have transformed their tragedy to support other families and victims impacted by gun violence all across America. Sandy, thanks so much for being here tonight. Could you share your story and tell us why you are working to connect with gunshot survivors and families who have been impacted by gun violence? And in your opinion, what type of services and resources are needed for them?
Thank you, Poe, and thank you for having us with you tonight. When Jessie was shot, we knew that we wanted to become active, but we didn't know how to. So when the trial started, we decided that we were going to be at the trial every single day. And we moved from Texas to Colorado in our camper and attended the trial. And that's when we started meeting all the other victims of that shooting, some of them who were terribly wounded, both psychologically and emotionally. And after the trial was over, I said to my husband, well, we've got the camper, let's just keep going. And since then, we've responded to 15 different mass shootings and have met survivors across the country who have been affected by gun violence. It's become a passion for us. And we see the needs of these people, and we see how they struggle to receive the services that they need. And they get bogged down in the bureaucracy of even trying. So they end up quite often living in poverty, some of them becoming homeless, not being able to get the services that they need because they can't even have the transportation to get to where they need to go to receive the services. So we met with Dwight Evans last year, which was a great meeting. Hello, Dwight. Representative Evans, and had a very good meeting with him, and talked about how we need to add into these bills the rapid response portion. It's wonderful to have a bill that discusses and addresses all the services that these people need, but if they're not aware that those services even exist or how to access them, then we're adding more bureaucracy instead of less. So what we're hoping to do and have these bills end up getting passed is to also support the rapid response, being able to get the information out to these people as soon as possible so they're not lingering in this space that is so vital for their future. If they don't know, then they can't receive. So we're proud to be a part of this. We have seen people like, we'll go back as far as Columbine, young man that just this year spent 7 months in the hospital with no money. He's impoverished. It took the community around him of gun violence survivors and people that care about this issue to get him a wheelchair, get him out of the hospital, get him into a space temporarily where he is able to be safe. Another case of a young lady who was hurt at Columbine as well, is in a wheelchair. Her mother couldn't handle her condition and committed suicide by gun just months later. Another young lady who is fighting to keep her legs from the Waffle shooting. Another young man from our shooting who took 4 years before he finally decided that he had to have his legs amputated. Another young woman that we're close to and watched her daughter be shot in front of her with a 12-gauge shotgun, and she too was wounded. She has lead poisoning in her body and is dependent to function at all on opioids, and now can't get the opioids that she needs because of the restrictions that have been applied. And her, she's having trouble negotiating and getting around that to be able to get the help that she needs. So this is typical of the survivors. This is not just, oh, that story and that story. This is typical of the wounded survivors in America. And our vets have access to services. We need to give the innocent victims of gun violence the same respect and services that they need.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate your effort and work with the survivors and sharing your story. Representative Dwight Evans, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I wanted to ask you to explain why you introduced HR 2585, the Resources for Victims of Gun Violence Act, and elaborate on what the bill will do to help the gun violence survivors and families.
I would say Sandy Phillips sort of answered that for me, but she did an excellent job. Good to see both of you, and it's absolutely a pleasure. I want to first compliment for Newtown having this discussion about survivors and victims, because I don't think there is anything that's been more important in terms of this discussion. It's obviously unfortunate with all the other kinds of things that we have going on, but I think that after listening to Sandy, and I had the chance to spend some time with her and with a lot of other people around the nation, people particularly in my district, it really brings home more and more for the need for resources or information for victims. There was a story written in the Philadelphia Inquirer that talked about victims and exactly what was taking place. And the fact that no one was paying attention to these victims and what was happening. And I thought that was something that was rather strange, that with the shootings that occur, and everybody doesn't die, but the fact of the matter is that people do get shot, and that no one provides the kinds of information that needs to be. So what I attempted to do is to talk about having a intergovernmental agency at the federal level that basically will provide information. I joined up with the next guest you have coming on is United States Senator Bob Casey. Senator Casey introduced it in the Senate, I introduced it in the House. But the whole fact was to raise the platform of victims and what needs to take place. With this month especially, and it's appropriate that you're doing this discussion and knowing the importance of it, that we need to raise the consciousness that victims face. And yes, I do have my orange on. I have my orange, my little bracelet right there, I have my bracelet on there. So, but I say to you that it's going to take this kind of a struggle to stick with the issue. It's going to be something that's not going to be issue. Change is never easy. As you can see, change is never easy. Change requires all of us, no matter where we are, whatever part of the country we may be from, but to find ways that we can bring together and focus on this mission relating to our victims. So I share with you that the bill I've introduced in the House, like the bill Senator Casey will more than likely talk to in the Senate, was our attempt to raise the consciousness. And we have a presidential election coming forward. We need to make that discussion a part of the presidential debate. And the way you make it a part of the presidential debate is you do what I have done, introduce it, and then you get it thrust into the debate. And so we can ultimately get it to become a law. This is an issue that I feel very strong about personally because, as I told Sandy, I've been working on this issue when I was in the state legislature for many years. And I've understood all the time who speaks for the victims of throughout this country. I know that as a person in the particular position I'm in, that I have an obligation, not from a political standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, from humanity standpoint. We need to be champions of this, and we need to once and for all make it happen. So I come on this webinar for the purpose of just trying to use my voice and adding my voice to this discussion, getting people to understand that this is only going to happen unless we pull together. So I share with you that I'm hoping, with working with Senator Casey and working with yourself and Sandy and her husband, others, that we will not give up and keep pushing on this issue.
Well, thank you for that, Rep. Evans. When I read the bill, I noticed that there's no funding involved with setting up this council. Do you foresee that after they make recommendations that you would push for some type of funding to support?
Yes, absolutely. You kind of want to take that first step and get your foot in the door on the case of an idea and then keep working at it. There's a lot of co-sponsors on it. People, have been charging on it. But we just want to keep raising the concept. And, you would think something like this should have been on the federal government before. It's not something that's come, but the inner relationships of the agencies are something that you would think is something we should have done a long time ago. And I'm very much determined to make that happen.
Well, thank you for that. And I have one more question. What can we do and what can the survivors and families do to help you push this bill forward?
I think that for wherever you live, look at if you're a congressperson in terms of networking with them, ask them questions if they're not a part of it. Why aren't you a part of it? Raise the issue. I don't have to tell you, as the stories throughout the country in terms of victims who are shot, throughout. We need to bring those stories up. It's telling those stories. It's using social media. It's using social platforms. It's using whatever way. From this, it's raising it and raising the question, why aren't we passing this bill? So the point of it is, I need you asked the question, I said you as the organization, to join with me and keep raising the consciousness of it.
Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your leadership on this issue, because it's something that has, there's been a hole, in the gun violence prevention space to really truly bring some resources for the families and victims and survivors that are directly impacted by gun violence. So we truly appreciate your effort.
Thank you.
Senator Casey. Trying to see if he's here. Thank you for joining us tonight and introducing the companion bill on the Senate side, S-1352. We're hoping that you can explain to us what type of support you have on the Senate side and how we can advance the bill to pass this bill in the future. Trying to see if Senator Casey has joined us. Okay, I'm not sure if he's on, so I'm gonna skip. And I know that Representative Debbie Murcasel-Powell is here with us tonight. Thank you so much. You understand the need for resources for families because you've been impacted by gun violence yourself. So we were hoping that you can share your personal story with us.
Thank you, Poe, and for organizing this conversation, and to the Newtown Action Alliance for hosting us tonight. It's good to see you, Dwight. Thank you, Lonnie and Sandy, for sharing your story and for your advocacy. I think right now our country is going through such a difficult time, and we are all feeling that profound sense of loss because of that video that we saw, that brutal video last week of George Floyd. And it's not just George Floyd, it's so many others. It's Breonna Taylor, it's Ahmaud Arbery. And it really does open up some leftover scars for survivors of gun violence, because we share that pain in many ways. It may not be exactly coming from the same place, but that sense of loss, that anguish and heartache, is definitely something that calls for Lonnie and Sandy, and for me, and for so many other survivors, to be advocates and to raise our voices and to continue to fight for justice in our country. And so, I came to Congress and I ran. I was one of the members that won in 2018. One of the main reasons why I did that is because there's a high rate of gun violence in my area, but also, like you said, Poe, I lost my dad when I was 24 years old. I got a call. I was getting my master's degree at the time. I was pulled out of class, and I had just spoken with him. He was in Ecuador. I had spoken to him the day before, and to be told that he had been killed and by a criminal with a gun. And throughout my adult life, I have always focused on doing whatever I can to bring justice, to bring protection to our community. But I miss my dad every day. It's something that I carry with me, especially when we're going through such difficult times in our country. I wish I could talk to him and get advice and guidance. I have my kids never were able to meet my father. And I know that they would have loved their grandfather. And so it struck me, and I have to be completely honest with you, it struck me, Poe, when I came to Congress and I saw that we had been focusing mostly to legislate and regulate guns and to pass gun reform laws. But the survivors that are left behind had never been part of the conversation. And so I hosted a roundtable and invited survivors from different areas in the country and different stories. And it was very clear and evident that there are no resources available for families that have lost their loved ones through because of gun violence. And another incident that happened last year is after the Parkland shooting, there were two teenagers, Calvin Desir, age 16, Sydney Ayo, age 19. They were left with such trauma from those shootings that they both took their lives. They survived the shooting, but then they both took their life after that shooting because they did not have enough support services. So I refuse to live in a world where an entire generation of children are growing up in a country that's plagued by gun violence at every turn. We are going to be actually observing next week the shooting, the Orlando shooting, the Post nightclub shooting. It's the 4-year anniversary. I'm very good friends with MJ Wright and Fred, who lost their son. He was 31 years old. We have to stop talking about the shootings, the people, and we need to bring some, not just sense of justice, like I was saying earlier, but support to those that are left behind. There are too many people left behind. And so I am now the gun violence, the vice chair of the gun violence task force, and I am committed to making sure that we never leave survivors out of the conversation when we're talking about gun violence. And I'm right now working on a piece of legislation that will provide specific support for survivors, for mental health, resources available for, I spoke with a wife who lost her husband and she was left without any resources. She didn't know, they didn't have finances in order. She didn't know where to go for that support. Those are the stories that we have to always bring up to make sure that in Congress, we do whatever we can to provide that support, whether it's through mental health or resources. And so I'm committed, Poe, this is something that is it's one of my main focus in Congress. I expect to be reelected in November so that we can finally bring some of these important pieces of legislation to the table, pass them, make them into law, like Dwight said, and bring us all together united as survivors, and so that we can stop the violence that we've been seeing in our communities.
Well, thank you for sharing your story and your commitment to supporting the survivors. I know that you sit on the House Judiciary Committee, and you've sat through some challenging conversations about gun violence, including the assault weapons ban hearing. And I was wondering if you had thoughts on how to move forward some of the other legislative proposals, that are on the list.
So I have been talking to the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. One of the laws that I think we need to really move on is the red flag law, because that's been passed in other states. I mean, if in Florida we were able to do that, we should be able to do that at the federal level. It seems like the Senate is not going to move on any piece of legislation. We are going to have to continue to bring public advocacy for this issue. And because we've been hit by this pandemic, a lot of things have been put on hold. We're going to continue to legislate. We're already working in the committee. Lucy McBath and myself have been pressing the Judiciary Committee to do other markups. I know that we have a few bills that we're trying to bring to the committee itself. I think advocacy is going to be very important. I have to tell you that with what we've been seeing in our country, the economic and health crisis, that's been the focus. And I think that the Speaker continues to see that as one of our main priorities, to see which bills we can put forth right away to bring relief, because there's so many people that are in pain and suffering because of the pandemic. But Lucy and I are working closely to put pressure on the committee to mark up some more bills and bring some of them to the floor. That's something that we bring up every single conversation.
I really appreciate that. And during the pandemic, as you know, we can't lobby Congress the way we typically do. What would you recommend, that families and advocates do to continue to advocate for various policies?
Well, conversations like the one that you're having today, bringing attention to the issue once again, I think it's important. I actually also had a conversation with Moms Demand, with the group Moms Demand, and they were bringing certain pieces of legislation to my attention so that I can pay attention to some things, and like the ghost guns that we're seeing. That's something that's extremely dangerous that we need to continue to talk about. we need to keep doing these Zoom events and making phone calls to your legislators. I'm willing to host a conversation with several of Congress members. If you want to bring that together, let's continue to do that. There are ways to continue to put pressure on elected officials so that they know that we have no more time to waste. This is a moment in our country where everyone is demanding justice, equality, fairness, safety. And I think that this is a moment when we have to be strong in making sure that we do what we need to do, not what we've promised we're going to do, but just to take action and show the American people why we have a Democratic majority in the House and what we are going to do to show everyone that reducing gun violence, protecting survivors of gun violence is going to be a priority for this Congress.
Thank you so much. You're amazing. You are definitely a champion of change, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you.
We look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
We're hoping that Senator Casey is on. Can his office unmute the phone if that's the case? Let's see. Hello.
Hey, Poe, you can hear me?
Yes. Is this Senator Casey?
Hello?
Can you hear?
Yes, it is.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much, Senator Casey, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate your efforts to, pass this Resources for Victims of Gun Violence Act in the Senate, and we wanted to hear from you if you're making any progress in the Senate, and if there is anything that we can do to support your efforts.
Well, thank you. You've already done a lot by your advocacy and your leadership, and those on this call are all part of that, as well as by convening this call. I think in terms of where we are, there's good news and bad news. The good news is we have a number of Democratic senators who are helping us. When I introduced the bill, I had as original co-sponsors both Senator Klobuchar and Senator Harris, and we've added to that since then. The bad news is we don't have a Republican yet, and we need Republicans, of course, in a Republican-controlled United States Senate that has been candidly resistant on a number of issues, including those that involve gun violence, even something as basic and simple as the Resources for Victims of Gun Violence Act. But we're going to continue to stay at it. I think we've been sidetracked, obviously, as a lot of priorities have been, by the challenge of COVID-19, as well as the economic and jobs crisis that has flowed in its wake. But it's a good reminder to get back at it and to use this issue and the broader issue of gun violence as a voting issue, because this is a big election year. I think it's by far the most important presidential election since 1932. Nothing else that comes even close. And it's also a very important congressional election. And I know Representative Evans, my friend for many decades now, and United States Representative Murcasel-Powell will be fighting the battle in the House and trying to make sure that that they have even more allies after the election's over. But I think it's one of those issues that, as much as we've seen attention focused, and appropriately so, on those who are lost to gun violence, there hasn't been nearly enough attention focused on those who survive gun-related injuries each year. I guess the estimate is 10 million Americans have been shot and injured during their lifetime. 10 million Americans shot and injured during their lifetime. That is the population of the state of Michigan, which is, I think, about the 10th largest state by population. A lot of countries in the world don't have 10 million people. So that's a lot of Americans. And when you consider, you multiply that number 10 million by several fold, and you can see the impact of those who have been shot and injured and then who survive. Their families are impacted, the economy, our society is adversely impacted. So we have to continue to make this case, even as we're making the larger case about reducing gun violence generally. People affected by gun violence have a lot of or I should say a wide range of immediate and long-term needs, whether it's housing and medical care, whether it's a financial impact, whether it's an educational or legal impact, and obviously the pain and the agony and the trauma that people live with for the rest of their lives. So I think the most important thing in terms of activism is to make members of the United States Senate aware that this issue is an issue that we can solve together by providing the information, the needed information that this legislation would provide, the information that a lot of Americans could benefit from when you have the establishment of an advisory council to help victims of gun violence. And of course, that includes survivors, their families, classmates, coworkers, so many others who are adversely impacted. So we got some work to do in the Senate. I, of course, hope, and this is not a political call, so I'll only say it is my hope that there is a different majority in the United States Senate after the November election, because that means we can move on a number of fronts that are either completely ignored, categorically rejected, or put off constantly for another day. And we've got to keep pushing to make sure that the American people know what's at stake.
Well, thank you so much. And I agree with you, and that's a priority for us, for our organization, and I hope it is for the gun violence prevention movement as well, because so many of you have written great policies that need to be passed, and it's now just a matter of having the right people in Congress and in the White House to pass these bills. So we appreciate your work. And I have one question, a follow-up question for you. You mentioned that millions have been injured by guns in all these years. And recently there's been information coming out of CDC that their non-fatal firearm injury estimates are unreliable because they collect information from a sample of hospitals that's designed to act as a cross-section of all the nation's hospitals, large and small and urban and rural. So we're hoping that you and Representative Evans and Representative Murcasel-Powell could look into what could be done to get an accurate number for us, so we can determine what type of assistance the families would need.
Yeah, I think the only way you can solve a problem is initially, at least, is to have the data, and that's something I'm sure we can all work together on to provide more accurate numbers, because there's no way that we're seeing that more and more, even in the context of COVID-19, where you have the need for collecting data in so many contexts, especially in communities of color, where there's not nearly enough data available for there to be an adequate response to people that have suffered disproportionately by way of cases, but also disproportionately by way of the number of deaths. So we're starting to have those data is essential conversations in Washington in connection with COVID-19, and I think it's especially important in this context of victims of gun violence.
Thank you so much. And I want to now open it up to our participants to ask questions. And I know, Don, have you been collecting the questions for the representatives? Don?
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Don. Have you been collecting some questions? And maybe we can unmute them so we can have them ask their question.
Sure. Michelle Wilde posted information. She is a survivor of the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting. Okay. And her concern has been lack of support for PTSD. She's having to pay out of pocket.
Michelle, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, yes. Main concern was, I was out of town, so I was out of state, which many victims are, and they return home to find that no one understands their experience. Surprisingly enough, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and no one that I could connect with had been through a mass shooting event. And going through therapist after therapist and reaching out, it was very difficult to find experts who could help victims such as myself outside of the area where the event took place. Of course, as somebody mentioned earlier, the veteran system, there's obviously experts. So, with these bills that are, excuse me, being introduced, I mean, at a federal level would definitely benefit, especially when victims cross lines. But I mean, how do you see, I guess, this specifically for the I guess this would be for S1352, I mean, with this advisory board at a federal level, and I was looking at that, how, if you've got a doctor and a therapist on these committees, how they would help victims in areas such as I've been, where people just, have no expertise in this area.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Senator Casey, did you want to attempt to answer that question?
Yes, Michelle, the question that you ask is an important one, because if you are a survivor and you can't access basic services, then you're left without a remedy or an answer. One of the things that we have to, I mean, it's both, I think, a healthcare access question, but it's also something that in the event of the bill passing and you have an advisory council set up, that council would have to submit a report to Congress on what the resources are, the existing resources, and identify any gaps that the federal government could address. So I would imagine that kind of review would identify the gap that you have outlined. But in the meantime, we should examine whether or not there are ways to get help to folks right now, as opposed to waiting for an advisory council to be formed, to meet, and then to issue a report to Congress. So that's something that I can have, if there's a way that you can transmit your contact information, maybe we can provide some feedback on ways to be helpful for those who are in a similar circumstance.
Oh, could I answer that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Gwen from South Carolina. When you're a direct victim and you're directly affected, every state have something that's called silver benefits. You can go online to your state, and a silver benefit will pay a certain amount of money for people directly affected by crime, and you fill it out, and they will pay for counseling for a certain amount of time. The issue is that it's not communicated well, because a lot of victim service providers don't educate them on that. But every state have a program called SILVA, and that is for victims of violence or whatever traumatic thing. So there is something in place. It is getting to know that it is there. Here in South Carolina, as a victim service provider and a survivor myself of several gun violence, like losing my dad, losing my sister, and losing my nephew and a first cousin, we couldn't financially pay for it. So I had to find what would work. So what I learned was that the silver benefits, you can go online, and that's just the word for it. And actually, I'll send a link into the email for you to go on, and you can pull it up for your state, and you can apply for benefits for you to get that counselor in their, what do you call it? Like if you got insurance that they would pay for. So it will help you. It would also help you with lost wages and a number of other things. That is not well known. So, you just have to find it. And like I said, I'll send it to you, because that's what I do a lot of work with my survivors and here in my state, to try to make sure that I help them get with resources that I can't afford them, that I have partnership with other organizations, site counselors that would give me a sliding scale and stuff like that to make sure that the survivors are getting what they need, because, you know, one person, one organization is not going to meet every need. So we build relationships. But silver is something that is a national thing for every state. And I'll email the link to you, and you can email it off to her. She can do the application. It's not a long, I think it's 2 pages, and she can submit it in, and it's all through email, and they'll help her. It was the turnover response is 60 days. But in the meantime, she can also get on Give an Hour, which is a therapy thing where she can do online counseling, is what they're offering right now too, because it does get hard for us.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Gwendolyn. Definitely share that information with me, and I will share that with the families. That's very helpful. Thank you. Don, do you have the next question?
If we can get the spelling for the program, I actually did a quick search here on Google concerning survivors victim services, and I found some individual ones concerning states, but nothing that handles lots of different places, and I have a feeling we might not have that in every state.
Okay, we can look into that.
Yeah, I just want to say, Poa, that's exactly the problem, that I think there may be some areas that have some agencies that provide support, others that don't. So that's exactly what my bill is going to be dealing with. And I don't have all the language, so I don't want to get into the details of it, but I'm working with you, with Newtown, with other groups as well, to make sure that we include all the services that survivors are going to need.
That's wonderful. That sounds like that's exactly what we need. Thank you. Don, do you have another person?
Yeah, I have actually, Kristen has responded saying that Victims of Crime Act is a national program. It's federal money that states allocate.
Mm-hmm.
So if Kristen would like to elaborate.
Kristen?
Hey guys.
Hi, Kristen. Kristen
I went
Song.
to a conference on this, and it's called Boca Funds, and it's federal money that is allocated to the states, and you have to apply, and it has a very specific statute that you have to, meet the criteria, but then it will help you pay for counseling, basically anything. If you want to do equine therapy, if you want to do art therapy, whatever works for you. So Michelle, if you have any problem finding it in your state, give me a call, because I do work directly with a woman in Connecticut, and I know she can connect you with your person in your state.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. We'll definitely connect all of you together so you can receive the service and information. Yes.
This is Sandy, and we've had a lot of luck of being able to connect with trauma therapists across the country that are willing to deal and support survivors without either for free or for very little cost. So if she'll reach out to us, we're happy to do our research and find somebody right there in Atlanta for her that will either see her for free or for very, very little money. And the thing that needs to happen here, and I think representatives will agree with me here, we have to reduce the bureaucracy to make it easy for these people who are so traumatized already to get the services. The trauma alone, for me, for an example, I could not handle paperwork, filling it out, even if it was simple. I could not handle doing that for a year at least. If it wasn't for Lonnie, nothing would have happened, because I was incapable of doing it. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about being a survivor of gun violence, is that your brain has actually changed its DNA from the trauma. So we have to simplify everything. So reach out to us. We will help connect you. We will do our research, and we will find someone for you in the area in which you live.
Thank you, Sandy. Don, is there someone else with a question for the
Yes.
Senator?
Refugio Rodriguez. He would like people to speak concerning support for survivors of gun violence or special programs for survivors who don't speak English.
Did you want to elaborate on your question?
No, I mean, so this is, my name is Cuckoo Rodriguez of Refugio. I work for Hope and Heal. I'm a program officer here. I'm also the chief equity officer. I think it's important to, I think, broaden the scope of the conversation in terms of the challenges I think that we've addressed with just general populations who are English speaking and who are survivors, but there's specific nuances, and I wonder if there's any resources out there, because I certainly have struggled to identify those, or any efforts to also be inclusive in that way to address the needs of non-English speaking communities who are also impacted, as well as communities that are impacted by police gun violence, because obviously that is certainly in the forefront right now and has existed for a long time. Maybe it hasn't been in the media, but it certainly has existed in communities of color for a long time. I just didn't know if there's any efforts or if anybody can speak to that.
Any other representatives? Representative Murcasel-Powell, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I always have something to say about everything. It's really bad. My mom said I never stopped talking when I was little. So I'm Latina Refugio, and one of the things, just to bring it back, that we don't have resources available in communities where other languages are being spoken. And through the pandemic, we've seen that people haven't gotten the resources that they need and the information that they need in Spanish. Here in Haitian, we have a huge Haitian community also here in Miami. So we had to actually specifically include and write legislation so that we can make sure that we had the resources available to translate all this information into these languages. So you're bringing up a really important issue, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because it's something that I'm always aware of, but I haven't seen anything specific to gun violence survivors, to make sure that we're culturally sensitive and can translate and have the resources to do that. But also, I haven't seen anything for survivors of police gun violence. But I will bring it up to the Judiciary Committee, because I am a member of the Judiciary Committee, and we're talking right now of all the different pieces of legislation that we're going to have to look at next week dealing with with police violence in general.
Great, very timely. Thank you so much. Don?
Yes, Penny mentioned a program that is based in Phoenix. Padres y Parentes de Víctimas de Crimen, and Jose Guzman runs it. So that's from Penny.
Thank you. Is there a question for any other representatives and senator?
I'm not saying real questions per se. People have been commenting about making sure that phone calls to congressmen can still get through. So if you're still not able to meet with people, that phone calls are another option.
Sure. Well, maybe if we have a little bit of time, Penny, did you want to make a comment about the recommendation you just made?
Right. So, Poe, you might actually remember Jose and Yanette Cortez from the GVPDM meeting in April of 2019. So the link I gave it actually for their Facebook page, and they are Spanish speaking. They are in Phoenix. I don't remember off the top of my head the services they offer, but I would definitely start there. So I think that's all I can offer with that. They're just incredible, fabulous people, Jose and Yanette.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, we have, I think, time for another question before we close. Is there anyone else?
Sure. Kristen mentions Ethan's Law. Can we bring that to the Judiciary Committee?
Yes, we introduced it. It was a few months ago. We're working on getting more co-sponsors on the bill, Kristen, and it's one of the pieces of legislation that I've been talking to the chairman about, but we need to get more sponsors on the bill before we can mark it up on Judiciary. I think we, at this point, we have about 109 co-sponsors, which is a great number, but we need a few more so that we can really put pressure on the chairman to mark this bill up. But like I said earlier, Lucy McBath and I are putting a lot of pressure on the committee to mark some of these bills up. I am hopeful that not June and July, but maybe September, we may be able to do something. We'll see, or we'll need to wait until after the election. But I'm hopeful that we may be able to mark them up before that.
That's great. We really need you and Lucy to, push and push, because there are a lot of other priorities, and we understand that. But this is so important because despite the fact that 109,000 people have died from COVID, and we're continuing to lose 40,000, Americans from gun violence, and many, many more thousands that are injured. So we really appreciate that. So before we close, is there one more question or comment from anyone?
Hello. Penny mentions that Ceasefire Oregon drafted an outline for mass violence investigatory board based on NTSB. So I'm sorry, Penny, I really massacred that. I'm sure you can do better.
Okay, go ahead, Penny.
Several years ago, actually, in response to Oregon Senator Ron Wyden call to what could be done, one of the things that we came up with is a concept of a mass violence investigatory board. So this is based on the National Transportation Safety Board. I will be very quick. So for example, when the Pulse shooting happened, let me back up. There was a train derailment in Hoboken, New Jersey. I think 108 people were injured, 1 person was killed. The NTSB comes in and figures out what went wrong, how to fix it, how to mitigate it, so we can reduce death and injury in the future if it happens again. If there's a criminal act involved, it also knows who to take it to the right people. So, but then you go to something like the Pulse shooting, okay? 50 people dead, 53 people injured. And some of the people, for example, ran into the bathrooms, to find shelter, and they died there. They were shot there. And we need to do much. We need really to have something like the National Transportation Safety Board to figure out how people can survive mass shootings, but not only that, how we can build our buildings or retrofit our buildings so that people will survive mass shootings. Now, I'm on the West Coast here in Oregon, and we certainly do that for hurricanes. We do that for floods. We do that for earthquakes. We even do it for tsunamis. We do not do it for mass shootings. And we know that even if we got rid of all the guns right now, if we stop all gun sales right now, we still have 400 million guns in the United States. We're going to have more mass shootings for decades. We need data on exactly how people can survive mass shootings. And by the way, if we have this data, that data can also go into figuring out how many people have been injured by mass shootings. And so that'll take care of the CDC question that we had previously. So we have written this up, for 3 or 4 years now. So we do have this. How would we fund it? Taxes on gun sales and ammunition. And I would be very happy to talk to anybody about that if they're interested. And again, basically, we just stole it from the National Transportation Safety Board. So that's what we have. So thank you for the time.
Thank you for that, Penny. So we're going to close out now, and I'm going to show you. Let's see. So I wanted to thank Senator Casey and Representative Evans and Murcasel-Powell and Sandy and Lonnie and all of you for joining us tonight and engaging in this really important conversation and learning more about the legislation that has been introduced, HR 2585 and S1352. We hope that you will take the time to contact your House members and senators to co-sponsor this really important bill, among other bills like Ethan's Law and Jamie's Law. And also, we want to ask you to wear orange on June 5th. That's this Friday. And we hope that since we can't get together in person to rally and march together due to COVID, we hope that you will meet us on social media, wear orange, tag us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and tell us why you're wearing orange. And most importantly, Lonnie has a message for you. Lonnie.
My message is to all of us that are listening here now. We heard Senator Casey say that this is the most important election since 1932. Well, I don't know about 1932, but I know in my lifetime, which has been pretty long, that this is the most important election that probably any of us has seen or will see in the future. And all the bills that we all talked about today are very, very important, and Sandy and I would like to see every single one of them get passed, plus repeal PLACA, plus background checks, plus. There's 100 bills on McConnell's desk that will never see the light of day unless we flip the Senate. We got to get the Senate. I mean, that's the most important thing that I could say to anybody. Of course, we're going to keep the House. We know that. And of course, Trump's going to be voted out in a landslide, so I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the Senate. Let's keep Senate and let's get real and really get out there and call these numbers that Poe's put up. Get on every Zoom you can. If you're not doing something, you're part of the problem.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask Manny Oliver, just to close us out by maybe explaining what we can do more passionately. Manny, are you still with us?
Yeah. I am here, and I was not expecting you to ask me anything tonight. But I like what I hear. I have mixed feelings when it comes to make sure that our buildings and our structures are safe for the next mass shooting. You know that I'm always being rejecting that because I think that shouldn't be another mass shooting, period. But that's why we fight in different angles. And I guess that the addition of everything that we do will bring the results. Once again, I standing ovation for you for doing this and getting us together, and for your demand of wearing orange on the 5th. I promise. I think I'll wear orange all the week, probably. So, but thank you very much for this, and it's always nice to listen to people that understand what we suffer.
Yeah. And thank you. And I know that I owe you a phone call because we're going to plan a webinar to educate others on how to be passionate about this issue so that we
with
can
Sandy, with Sandy.
Yes. And then we can outshout the gun lobby.
Yes.
So, people look out for that. Also, we have our Junior Newtown Action Alliance. They're putting together a music summer series for young people to, share their tragedy and share their hope and dreams through music. So please join us, and we'll have more conversations regarding other policies such as assault weapons ban. So stay tuned for more information, and stay safe and healthy, and take care of yourself and wear orange. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.